Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome to today's discussion. This is an interesting one posted by Throwaway54 on the Path of Exile builds subreddit. And the question posed today is really, do you feel like defenses and offensive output in Path of Exile are build dependent or not? Now we're going to get into some more context about what we mean by that statement. But essentially what we're saying is it more beneficial for builds in general as a result of gameplay and game design decisions? Is it more beneficial for players to generally seek to invest in their characters more offensively or more defensively? Which of those two in general do you feel like, as a recommendation blanket statement for builds? We recognize we're painting with broad brushstrokes here. But in general, does offense just solve more problems than defense in Path of Exile? Okay, so here's the post. Let's get into it. Basically, the title was, "It remains disappointing how many problems can be solved with more damage. I'm a fairly casual, running Archmage Ice Nova like a meta slave. I leveled to 95, got my stones, started farming juice, kept dying. I realized I was never going to level up at my current rate of death every few maps. I tried tanking up, fixing my chaos resistance, getting more life, lore weave, eternal damnation going, etc. Still kept dying, so I just said, forget it. More damage. I'll just die more, but at least I'll get rich. Ditched the lore weave and damnation, dropped my DPS flasks in, bought more mana. Well, as per usual, I haven't died in 20 to 30 8-mod maps now, currently midway through level 96. This isn't even remotely unusual. Past the very basic layers of defense, it's almost always more cost-effective to go for more damage than more tankiness. Obviously, this eventually tapers off at truly high levels of damage, but until you're deleting everything, tankiness is just actively worse than more damage. And it's a bit frustrating that this is still the case. I've built truly tanky characters too, like Bone Zone Jug and ES Tricksters. But I've only had one level 100 character, a glass cannon Cold Blade Vortex with 60 million damage and 0 defenses other than evasion. That gives us the context for today's discussion, and I'll post this whole thread down below so you can interact with all of the wonderful commenters down below. There's a whole bunch of several different posts worth of comments down below in this discussion. There's something around 109 comments. There's just a ton of people chatting, which is great. Wonderful discussion. But I wanted to host it here for us in G3 because I think it's an important design discussion wrapped around the nuance around builds. I am now, in one of the rare cases, going to give my opinion. I am no longer summarizing someone else's opinion. I am giving my own, all right? So normally I don't do that. Normally I do the opposite. I go, hey, I'm just going to summarize stuff for the sake of the discussion. I'll let you all share your opinions down below, and I'll mostly stay out of it. Today I'm going to give my opinion. In general, the answer is defenses are of less value than offenses in a softcore environment. In a hardcore environment, if you play Path of Exile in a hardcore environment where when you make a mistake or when the game just decides that there's a whole bunch of damage that's due to come your way, if you don't have that added layer of whatever defensive mechanic, block, spell suppression, maxed chaos resistance, physical damage mitigation, damage over time reduction, a flask that makes you immune to an ignite or to a freeze, whatever it is, if you don't have that one layer, that one extra layer of defenses, then boom goes the dynamite and away goes your character. That's in a hardcore environment. When I'm playing in hardcore environments in Path of Exile, generally I will prioritize making that little bit of extra effort regardless of the build, on my defensive layers. However, in a softcore environment, I think it's absolutely true that more offenses is the way to go in general. And if you're pushing for levels, I think this player, although it's anecdotal, it's just one player, there's not a whole lot of data behind this, right? This is just anecdotal. I think it is true. Generally, the more offensive output you've got, the less stuff that's on the screen available to deal damage to you. Well, that means that you're going to have less chances to die. There's less sources of damage coming at you, so you need to up your levels of offensive output, of damage per second output. in order to reduce the chances of your whatever existing layers of defenses will be breached and your character will die. I think one of the trickiest aspects about playing Path of Exile in a softcore environment where you are trying to push for levels, particularly into the high 90s, is finding a balance between and level of comfortability between what your character can do, like in theory what it can do, versus in practicum what you're actually able to do with a, eye of focus turned off of being laser focused power gamer, absolutely watching every source of damage and reading every source of possible loss of experience, okay? That's a big deal. And there's a difference. So, for instance, this league in Necropolis, there's a difference between telling players or advertising about your build or sharing about your build or bragging about your build. My build can do tier 17 maps. Okay, that's fine. Maybe it can. How many portals does it take? What sort of mods on tier 17s does it not do well running? What sort of style of gameplay needs to be played in order to successfully take down that tier 17 or whatever uber boss it is that the content of the build is trying to take on? There's a difference and a level of nuance between saying my build can do this with X number of portals or with X level of caution versus saying I'm just playing for experience, and so I want as many monsters on the screen as possible for me to be blowing up, for me to be zooming and getting as much experience as possible over time. I don't want to be reading things like Exarch or Eater variables, right? I don't want to be worried about that. I don't want to be worried about map mods on a particularly 8 modded corrupted map or a tier 17 or whatever it is that you're running. There's a difference between saying my build is capable of pushing this level of content and will die versus saying, nope, this is the level of content where I can pretty much AFK brain dead run through this amount of content and still kill monsters and still gain XP and not be punished for it by losing that experience over the course of however many maps I'm going to be running during my gameplay session. That's the difference. That's a key. And when you go into a softcore environment versus a hardcore environment, again, this is all just my opinion, I think there's a massive difference between saying my build is going to prioritize offensive outputs because if I do die, it's going to hurt me. I'm going to suffer, but I'm still going to have my character, and I can go back and tweak and say, okay, that level of content or whatever those mods were, I need to watch out for those in the future. Whereas on a hardcore character, you're not going to say that. If you're pushing for high levels of experience in hardcore, you're already watching out for so many things. It's just a completely different experience. And so I think that's why there's two different answers to this question. In a softcore environment, in general, you invest in damage, that's going to feel better. And it may actually, in the long run, pull you out and give you more experience in the long run just because there's less stuff on the screen to be able to deal damage to you. In a hardcore environment, it's not about just having less stuff on the screen that can kill you. It's about having nothing on the screen that can kill you. And the things that can kill you on the screen, you are hyper aware and attuned to them, so that way you can respond and react accordingly. Those are two separate mindsets. And so those are two separate approaches and two separate answers even to this question about whether or not offensive output is really the way to go and really the just general broad brushstroke way to invest into your character. I personally have only played one character here during Necropolis. Many of you know I'm the dad gamer. I've got the jobs and the games with the kids and the soccer stuff and the family obligations galore, and it's awesome. But I've only had time to play one build during Necropolis, and it's been a fantastic build. It's been the holy relic of what? Of conviction? Of convocation? I don't even know, but it's been the Holy Relic Transfigured Gem. You'd think I would know what it's called. Anyway, off the top of my head, one of you will post it down below. I can post the POB down below as well. It's been awesome, and I have noticed the same trend. While there are a couple of layers of defenses that I can up in order to get better, supposedly defensive stats, the best way to play that particular build in a softcore environment, because it can literally off-screen things, is just to up the level of damage that it pumps out. So that way there's fewer things on screen that can kill me. And I'm talking running tier 16s with Breach and with Abyss and with Delirium and with XP Shrines and all sorts of things. Like as many things as possible on the screen, and the build is able to handle it because it can blow stuff up at a distance from your character. And anything that is close to your character, it will reprioritize the damage to hit that. So it's just this awesome build. But I wouldn't necessarily describe the build as being particularly tanky. I could take way fewer divines and way fewer investment and dump it into, let's say, a righteous fire character, and that character would feel more tanky, even though I think that character that would feel more tanky would actually die more often than my current iteration of the Holy Relic Necro, because of the level of content that I can pursue and the amount of screen clearing XP that I can just gain simply because of the amount of damage that I can put out. It really is a really interesting equation to solve. And so I will use that as one last thing that I'm going to share today. This is not only a difference in perspective based off of the type of Path of Exile you engage in, whether that's solo self-found hardcore or, solo self-found softcore, or Trade League softcore versus Trade League hardcore. I think that is a layer of one component to answer the question. But I think another component to answer this question is the sort of build that you are running. For instance, we can all laugh, haha, melee in Path of Exile. Imagine discussing melee in 2024. But melee, if you're playing a character that is more melee based, right? So several years ago now, I played a Viper Strike Pathfinder, was one of the tankiest characters I've ever played. And because of the prolif, even though it was a melee based character in terms of its range of the initial hit, as soon as I would hit something that was close to me, it would prolif and blow up the whole screen, right? So that's a character that in theory is a melee character. So you want really, really high layers of defenses, right? Because there's going to be stuff on the screen that can potentially hit you. And yet, because of the prolif and the screen clearing ability, pumping out more damage actually made that character more tanky and more survivable and more able to acquire experience in a softcore environment than upping the available levels of investment for defensive layers. Whereas, like we said earlier, a Righteous Fire character, like, you can just get absolutely absurd numbers in terms of the amounts of hits that you can tank and huge hits that you can take and absorb as a Righteous Fire character. And yet, because you're not clearing screens necessarily, unless you're playing Explosive Righteous Fire, because you're not necessarily clearing screens in an instant, it means that you are taking more hits and there's just more stuff that can hit you that could potentially kill you. So it is this really interesting trade-off. Like, depending on your build, the answer may also change. So those are the factors, at least, that came into my mind as I was reading this post here this morning and thinking, okay, I think the answer depends based off of the style of Path of Exile that you're playing and the style of build that you're playing. If you're playing something where you need to get close to stuff, then probably more defenses does matter. Whereas if you're able to off-screen stuff, I mean, that's just ridiculous. And I'll go back to the quote from the original author here, saying, the highest level 100 character, the one level 100 character that they had was a glass cannon with a bunch of evasion and just a bunch of damage. Well, on the one hand, that sort of makes sense, right? Especially if you're playing as a headhunter build. Like, once you get up and running, once your build gets to the stage in a map, if you're running a map in 2 minutes or a minute and a half, once your build gets to the stage where you just can't die because you're screen clearing and off screening, even most packs, like, nothing can hit you. Because a lot of the time in Path of Exile, this is just something that's observable. You all can notice it. Mobs have a particular amount of range that you need to be in as a player in order to get you. And so while all of us have died to off-screening things before, it is way more common for things to die off-screen to us than it is for us to die off-screen to something else. So because of the way how range works and proximity works and the number of skills that can fire from a certain range, like, we as players have a massive advantage if you can hit stuff off-screen and deal damage to it when monsters have to either move or we have to move in proximity to them in order for them to actually deal damage to us. So I think this is one of the reasons why emphasizing damage can more often than not provide you with more XP in the long run rather than with layers of defenses. By the way, you can also test this theory as well. When you look at the top builds in hardcore, not only are they incredibly tanky in terms of their defensive layers, but they've also got incredible amounts of offensive output. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'd love to read your thoughts down below in the comments. Drop me a comment and I'll try and respond to you all, each and every one of you, as time allows today. Thanks so much for joining us for the discussion, and I hope the ongoing 324 Necropolis League is the league. A Mirror of Calandra drops for you. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.